that came on my phone 3 minutes ago. An alert you'd expect to see in Israel. Lebanon doesn't have an alert system. Iran, I'm not sure if they do. But due to the current situation, potential missile threats, immediately seek a safe place in the closest secure building, etc. So it came in 3 minutes ago. You never know. End up seeing something in the background that hasn't happened yet. But here we are, Colonel. So first question, general question is, how would you describe the current situation? How bad is it? And do you expect it to get worse, or do you expect Trump to seek an off-ramp? You know him pretty well.
Well, first, let me point out that I think it was in August of 2023, I was interviewed by Tucker Carlson. I was up in Maine at his establishment, and he said, "Are we on the road to war with Iran?" And I said, "Yes. I have been saying we are headed to war with Iran for 3 years nonstop. To be perfectly blunt, I'm surprised it has taken this long." So there's no news for me in this particular development. I guess the next question is, where are we now in this process? To understand where we are, we need to back up a little bit and look at what might have been in the minds of people in the White House when they decided to join with Netanyahu and start this war. I think the first thing to understand is that you always have assumptions that people make. We're very bad at assumptions because we tend to pay more attention to assumptions that please us than we do to evidence. So I think a combination of arrogance and ignorance in the White House, coupled probably with the willingness of people in the military to provide the right answer, gave us the conflict. Another reason we're in conflict is that we mirror image. We assume that the enemy thinks the way we do, or our opponent thinks the way we do, and the opponent never thinks the way we do. And then finally, I think it was
Sorry, can you that? There you go.
You're not going to leave, are you?
No, I'm not going to. It's just, it's happened. A few of them have happened. But just to tell you how, for people sitting outside in the West to understand, this never happens in the Gulf. But sorry to interrupt you, Colonel.
Yeah, no, that's all right. So as a result, we have two different wars being fought. The war that we set out to fight was supposed to be short, sharp, and decisive. We were going to punish those terrible Iranians for all the threats they've made to Israel. Clearly a state of peaceful intentions with no expansionist ideas. And in setting out to punish these Iranians, we sat down with the Israelis and said, well, how do we do this? And the first thing that came up was this dumb idea of regime change, as though you could kill a few people at the top of a command structure or national structure and bring a nation of 93 million people that is roughly the size of Western Europe to heel. And then when it became clear that regime change wasn't going to work, we said, well, we'll have to double down and drop more bombs, fire more missiles, and compel them to accept unconditional surrender. That certainly has worked out well. In the meantime, the Iranians, who always knew this was coming, just as I said it, and many other people said it, had spent the last 20 years putting together a way to survive it. And that has been their goal, to survive the inevitable onslaught of American military power. And they've done it. And not only have they survived it, but they've managed to strike back very decisively against their opponents. And they have punished everyone and anyone who worked with, supported, or cooperated with the United States and Israel. So right now, the Iranians, despite all the damage that they've taken, and they have taken substantial damage inside their country, is actually in a very strong position. We, on the other hand, that have made all these strident, ill-advised demands and silly remarks, are sitting around trying to figure out what we are going to do next. We boast about destroying the Iranian Air Force. Well, the Iranians have not had an Air Force to speak of since the Shah left. Just as insignificant. Yeah. And as far as the Navy is concerned, well, we sank the 7 frigates that were the backbone of the Navy. We're dealing with small boats, and we seem to think that that's a significant achievement. And I was listening to General Kane, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, read from what sounded like a spreadsheet from an accountant and tell us about all the sorties that have been flown and all the thousands of places we've struck and dropped bombs, as though this was a metric for success. We've learned nothing since 1965. We went through this in Vietnam. I remember as a young man listening in 1969, 70, 71 to similar officers in uniform stand there and tell us, well, today we flew this many sorties and we dropped these many bombs and this much tonnage. And the entire time we were doing this, we were losing the war. Nobody seemed to understand that until it was too late. I think now we are genuinely in a state of confusion. And I think that President Trump, as you point out, very definitely is looking for an off-ramp. The problem is no one's going to give it to him. He can't get it. And the Iranians are in no hurry to end this because they are winning. Now,
how do you determine winning?
You want?
So when you say Iranians are winning, by the way, I've made this statement many times that Iran doesn't want to end this war until they inflict enough damage to deter any future war. But it's hard to really tell how much success, though, the US is having. Obviously, CENTCOM will put out reports that they've destroyed, or especially Israel, 70, 80% of the missile launchers. Iran would say, no, that's not the case because they have them on the ground. Seeing the amount of bombs that were dropped on the country, the amount of targets that were hit as well, and how the amount of missiles being fired have dropped significantly, even more than the 12-day war, about 95% drop. Is it fair to say that their missile launching capabilities have been degraded, but their drone manufacturing capabilities are still there, and that is their best bet to keep the Strait of Hormuz shut, to keep striking the Gulf, as we're seeing right now with the alert I just got? We saw the Oman, one of the ports in Oman that was burning today. I'm sure you've seen that. These type of scenes you don't expect to see in the Gulf, and they continue to achieve that through their drones. They don't really need their missiles in today's age.
No, I don't agree with that. I think that they have undoubtedly lost launchers. The dramatic degradation that you're talking about, I question, because every time somebody talks about the degradation, they launch Khorramshahr 2 or 3 missiles with 1,000-pound warheads that then devastate the target wherever it is. I think what you're seeing today is that they have very precise weapons. If they fire at something, they're going to hit it. It's the exact opposite of what President Trump said the other day when he said, well, they're not very accurate. Nothing could be further from the truth. They're extremely accurate. And they don't have to fire as many missiles as they previously did to reach the target. And remember, they also fired a lot of missiles at the beginning of this thing in order to deplete the arsenal of anti-missile missiles, which were in Israel and the Gulf Emirates and states, as well as with the Navy at sea. And I think they've succeeded. I mean, I'm sure that we are getting close to the bottom. This is before we reload in great numbers. We started, I think, with roughly 8,000 missiles. I don't know where we are now. The Iranians started with 45,000 missiles. There's no evidence that they're about to run out. But what we're seeing are the best, the most accurate and devastating weapons. And I got to tell you that the engineers that I've spoken to here, and I've spoken previously to engineers in Israel that warned about this, I didn't understand at the time. This is back in 2020. But the engineers are saying that the achievements of the Iranians in missile technology are dramatic. They're impressive as hell. And everything they hit, they've devastated. Now we're shipping, as you know, a THAAD radar, and I presume more THAAD missiles and launchers to Israel. I wonder what
the people think.
What?
From South Korea. You're talking about the ones they pulled out of South Korea. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think our position is a little less robust than President Trump and his administration would like us to believe. And I think the Iranians are being very careful now. They're looking at battle damage. They're examining it with drone footage, but also with satellite imagery. And they are now hitting things with a very specific purpose to fundamentally eliminate capabilities. I think they're also holding back to see what will happen in the near future. In other words, if we are stupid enough to attack Karg Island, which we've threatened to do, then they will launch, I think, everything that you can imagine against the oil infrastructure in the Gulf. They will, of course, push back any sort of restoration of the oil infrastructure for years. So I don't think that Iran is in a particularly bad shape. I think they've lost a lot of hospitals. They've lost schools. We've done a horrendous damage to Tehran. There's no question about it. But again, this is Persia. This country's been around for 2,700 years. It's not going anywhere. It has no intention of surrendering or capitulating. Anybody who thinks so is crazy. And I think we bet very heavily on this business of internal uprising and revolt and readiness to throw out whoever is in charge. I think if we had stayed out and not bombed, perhaps by the fall of this year, we would have seen a different government. I think the Iranians are ready to move beyond the old Islamic Republic. All we've done is slow it down. We've retarded that development. I think it'll still happen at some point, but we've made it harder on the country to do what it would have done naturally without our interference. But here's the key. No matter who comes to power now, Mario, will hate us. We've done enormous damage. We are not going to have a friend in that country for a very, very long time.
So then we're kind of at a crossroad right now. It seems like we're at a fork, or Trump is at a fork right now. Either he seeks an off-ramp, which I think he, based on his speech, based on the way I've seen him think and act with Venezuela and tackling in other instances, China, Greenland, I think he's wise enough to seek an off-ramp and not admit defeat, but also twist it into a victory somehow. We've destroyed their nuclear program. We've destroyed their missile capabilities. But I've been the optimist for a while, even when we had a discussion after the 12-day war, and I'm like, this is not going to happen again. You told me it will. And I've been wrong time and time again. I never thought we'd be here. And the alternative that's being talked about is boots on the ground with a focus on Karg Island, which is where 90+% of the refining of Iranian oil happens. It just sounds disastrous to me with my limited experience. How would it look like if that does move ahead? Is there any scenario where boots on the ground makes sense in any way whatsoever?
No, not for us, not for the United States. Absolutely not. And Mario, we haven't got the so-called boots to send. Today's United States Army is a fraction of its former self. If you go back 30 years, 32, 33 years, we had 800,000 men in the Army. We were able to put 300,000 on the ground in Saudi Arabia and Kuwait. We can't do that now. We don't have those forces. And remember, those forces also included Marines. And the Marines are very lightly equipped now. At least at that point, they could fight on land because they had a lot of artillery and tanks and other things. And then finally, you got to remember that we're not really equipped, trained, or prepared for the kind of warfare that we would confront. All you have to do is take a look at Eastern Ukraine and see how warfare has profoundly changed, to understand that any ground force is likely to be paralyzed unless it can gain control of the space above it. And that's a very difficult process. How do you annihilate, stop, and neutralize all of these drones that fly all over the place all the time, from the very smallest that carries perhaps a grenade to the very largest? We're not prepared for that. So if we were trying to do something like this, it probably wouldn't work out very well for us. I keep trying to get people to understand something else. They just don't get it. Today's satellite-based intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance capabilities, together with the collection devices that we have that are in the sort of terrestrial environment, mean that your opponent has pretty much persistent surveillance of everything on the ground that you do. That's very important. And because it means that, let us say we decided, we're very clever, we'll land on the Syrian coast because that's closer to, say, Iran. We don't have as far to march and move and so forth. Well, by the time you picked the harbor and started to bring in ships with equipment and brought in troops, you would be targeted with these missiles. They would do enormous damage. They'd kill thousands of men. In other words, how do you get out of the gate? You can't repeat what you did in 1990 and 91, this slow, ponderous buildup. It's not going to work. And then, despite the fact that I'm going to sound like a broken record, because I'm sure everybody else has said this, the notion of depending exclusively on air and naval power to achieve enduring strategic outcomes is absurd. I mean, we've been through this so many times, it doesn't work. All you do is normally make things worse, and I think that's what we've done. Now, the key thing, though, for you and for me and for everybody else to understand is something that Professor Morandi said recently. He said, we do not support the status quo. We are not going to live with the status quo. We will not live with an existential threat from Israel. We will not put up with countries across the Persian Gulf who are providing access, support, and assistance to our enemies. This is unacceptable. We need to understand that, because what he's effectively saying, Mario, is when this war ends, people like me who are Americans are out. We are not going to be allowed to reset bases in the Middle East. We're not going to be allowed to stage military power in the Middle East directed at Iran or anybody else. It's not going to happen. How can we accept that? I think we can accept it very easily because I have a different perspective. I think the world is better off when we're not basing troops on foreign soil. I've never liked it. I think it's a bad idea. I'm happy to get out. But in Washington, where everything is mortgaged to vanity, especially with the president, how does he accept that without saying, well, we've been defeated?
I just don't see a scenario where American troops were put out of the Gulf. Like, things must go so wrong for the US. I know they're already going wrong to an extent, but I mean, significant more damage being caused. Because I think while it's not going well for the US, Iran's being pummeled as well. You know, we're seeing over 5,500 targets struck, and Israel's kind of taking it to another level. They've struck their oil facilities. You saw the acid oil rain, which is just, I don't know how anyone in the world is okay with this, but there's something that Israel did, Colonel, I want to get your thoughts on. They struck an Iranian desalination plant, a water purification plant. That was very bizarre for me because Iran doesn't really need it. They've got over 30 of them. They've also got a lot of rivers. They've got a lot of sources for water. The Gulf need those desalination plants. And if Iran responds in kind, which they've done previously, and they've already struck, I think, one in Bahrain or Qatar, if they strike desalination plants in the Gulf, then we're in a pretty scary situation where they could start to choke off the Gulf from a necessity, not a nice to have, but a necessity for the people there. My question to you is, why did Israel strike the oil depots? Why did, without American approval, according to reports, why did they strike a desalination plant in Iran? And why did the Jerusalem Post put out a false story and piss off the Emirates by saying the UAE is striking Iranian targets when the UAE was not doing so and there was no reports of them doing so? Is it the obvious? I know I'm asking kind of a rhetorical question. Is Israel just trying to drag the US in a prolonged war? And to what extent?
Oh, I think that's very true. I think they would like to have us in a state of perpetual warfare with the enemies of Israel. That's their view. But you need to come to terms with the reality. The Israelis don't care about anybody in the Gulf. They could care less. They don't care about anybody who is not a Jew. Let's be frank. This is the state of Jewish supremacy. This is a war of Jewish supremacy. How many times do you have to listen to someone like Netanyahu or Ben-Gvir or a host of other people tell you that? At some point, you have to take people at their word, believe what they are saying. And they don't give a damn about us. We are only useful insofar as that they can employ our military power at will in support of their goals. Is it in our interest to destroy the Iranian nation state? No, we have no interest in that. Why would we be interested in doing a thing like that? We want to trade. Trade is the lifeblood of our nation. We are a commercial state. We're not some sort of totalitarian Soviet Union that walls itself off and then tries to impose new communist regimes in other states. That's all nonsense. Israel is interested in one thing, Israel. And if Israel has to sacrifice millions of people in order for it to feel safe, in order for it to dominate the region, that is exactly what Israel will do. Now, inside the United States, this truth is finally beginning to be felt. People are beginning to figure this out. And they're asking the question, what are we doing? What is this for? Why would we implement a draft and raise 1 million men and then move them 6,000 miles from the United States to attack people in Iran? People are asking that. What's the reason? What's the strategic purpose? Was Iran a threat to us? And people know that's not true. We've been listening to all of these lies for years. Oh, the Iranians are 2 weeks from a nuclear weapon. Iran's been 2 weeks from a nuclear weapon for at least 30 years. And by the way, if they get a nuclear weapon, they're going to nuke America. What? Why? Is there a particular reason for that? No. And remember, historically, when we went into the Gulf, we said our purpose there was to permit commercial traffic. In other words, to facilitate it, to protect it, to encourage it, not to stop it. But then under tremendous pressure from the Israeli lobby in the United States and the Zionist billionaires that back it and Israel itself, we finally decided, all right, we'll go to war and we'll get the deal that you want. We'll emasculate Iran. We'll make them bow to your interests and what you want. After all, that's happened in the Gulf. That's what the Gulf states have done. Effectively, Saudi Arabia has done that. Has anyone ridden to the rescue of the Palestinians who are being murdered or expelled from their homes? Has the Egyptian army said we have a moral obligation to our brothers to cross Israel's border and protect all of these people who are being driven from their homes and killed? No. What about the Turks? What about the Turks? There's the 500-pound gorilla in the room. The largest army in NATO, a powerful state, supposedly Muslim, supposedly feeling solidarity with Muslims everywhere. And what have they done? Nothing. And Syria, what's happened in Syria? We removed the moderate who actually ran the country and essentially tolerated Shiites, Jews, Armenians, Christians. We got rid of him. We replaced him with an ISIS al-Qaeda alumnus. That suits Mr. Netanyahu. That seems to suit Mr. Erdogan. But now we see the Israelis moving north in Lebanon. Eventually, the Israelis are going to move north in Syria. What will the Turks do at that point? The only nation state in the region that has said no thank you to Israel is Iran. And so it had to be attacked. It had to be destroyed. Only it refuses to be destroyed. And it refuses to capitulate. That's the stark truth.
What happens if Trump seeks an off-ramp and Iran refuses that? Well, they want to continue the war, as we said to the toe.
Iran has already said, we are not going to negotiate. Forget it. You've had it.
So what happens if they keep bombing Israel? What happens if their capabilities don't get eroded and the US pulls out and they keep bombing Israel to ensure it never happens again? What could Israel do next?
It presupposes that we can disengage. See, I don't think Mr. Trump has had this conversation with Mr. Netanyahu, because without us, Israel is going to have a tough time surviving. This is a world-changing event in the Gulf. Sykes-Picot is over. Everyone's had it. And the Muslim people who live in all of these countries have had it, even if they're elites who are wealthy and enjoying the good life don't necessarily agree with them. The truth is the vast majority of Muslims, Arab, Turks, and Persians have had it. So the old Sykes-Picot arrangement is dead. So what's going to happen? I don't think we can just arbitrarily disengage. We're going to have to come to terms of some kind. And I think we know what those terms are. Iran is going to say, America out of the Gulf. And I don't think that the people that are living in the Gulf by the time this happens will object to that, because they now know we cannot protect them. Have you been protected by the United States Armed Forces? No, we can't do it. We cannot protect them. We can't even protect Israel, although we're doubling down on trying to do that with everything that we've got. By the way, if you're in the GCC, you're watching where all the missiles are going, where all the radars are going and the assistance. It's all going to Israel. It's not going to them. So